Welcome back, Mike, after quite a long break. This is our first episode for a couple of weeks.
Yes, thank you. Nice to see. Well, it's not that we haven't seen each other. We've been
mhm.
working hard behind the scenes, but yeah, a while since we've done a podcast.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about something that we've touched on a little bit before and go into it a little bit deeper. So it's the subject of how to regulate your appetite. Um, this is something that many people will have difficulties with once they start approaching nutrition and food from a weight loss point of view. The conventional wisdom on this subject is that we need to eat less, perhaps count calories in order to manage what we're eating and maintain a healthy weight. And I think you and I look at this in a similar way, in that counting calories every day or several times a day doesn't really appeal. It's a bit of a hassle. Everybody's busy. Do we really want to be looking at apps and looking at numbers to quantify what we're eating? Uh, I don't want to completely dismiss this approach because it does work for some people. Um, However, there's the hassle of doing it. It's not really a lot of fun. I think people can get off track if they don't think about the actual quality of their food, because that, to me, is actually what comes first. So we'll explore that subject a bit. And I think the angle that we're coming from really is if the quality, the what of your nutrition is the first thing that you look at, the quantity tends to take care of itself. So let's dig into that a little bit more. Do you want to start, Mike, with some of your experiences around managing your weight and introduce how you've arrived at where you are now?
Yeah, I think well, from young on all the way up to university, I was lean as anything, six pack. I was a skinny person. I wasn't muscly, but you could see my six pack in holiday photos when I was 18. I went to university, started drinking. I went at 10 stone, went down to 9 stone 2 originally because I didn't start drinking till the end of the first term, but steadily over the next few years went up to 13 plus stone. Um, Yo-yo dieted after that on experiences like you. Mum was very much into nutrition, can heal everything, food. We tried everything. I mean, we followed all the healthy food advice. We went from whole milk, whole fat milk to skim milk, special breakfast cereals that were supposedly better for you. Um, Vegetables, we did meat and vegetable only diet, all sorts along the way. We tried Atkins, basically, yeah, all sorts. I got cancer, started revisiting that, everything. I recovered went through a period of what was effortless weight loss. So I was eating following an anti-cancer protocol. This was my first realization or awareness that potentially weight loss should be easy. We shouldn't have to think about it, because I'd subscribed to all the calorie counting as a fitness trainer. That's what I'd used with clients, etc. I tried to use it myself and used it sort of successfully for short periods, but never for any lengthy period of time. But yeah, following the Budwig protocol, which was a vegetarian protocol, but it was high protein, high fat. We're using cottage cheese and flax oil and coconut oil as its main fat sources, and lots of green vegetables. The way I did it, um, that was my first period of effortless weight loss, and it was this anti-cancer protocol. But I went from 14 and a half stone down to 11 stone over a year and a half. And I played around with intermittent fasting and stuff in there, and did all sorts of other things related to the protocol, which we'll touch on after we looked at the food side of things, because I think appetite and stuff, it's multifactorial. Um, I then started, after I recovered from cancer and back operation, and the influence of movement on this. You mentioned eat less. The thing that comes into that often is move more as well. So we're burning more calories through moving in theory and eating less, and that is the traditional prescription. I think most research over time shows that from a direct point of view, exercise doesn't impact weight loss in a massive way. And that experientially for me was borne out when I was immobilized through to my herniated lumbar disc. I actually lost weight in the time I was lying on the floor for 6 weeks, which was interesting. But there are also times where through chemo, for instance, I ended up putting on weight through my cancer treatment. 5 years after cancer, I'd started working more, working late at night, started eating at different times, and also come across the work of Ray Peat and others, and realized my body temp was a bit cold. So I started eating for body temp, but all the wrong things. Well, high carb, and I was eating it late at night, and I ballooned in weight again really, really easily. And then for the next probably 4 years, 2014 through to maybe even longer actually, through to just pre-lockdown, I really struggled with weight. I've got some horrible photos which I'll be posting at some stage when I'm brave enough. And actually, and this was when I was working as a fitness trainer as well. And I just had layers of blubber everywhere. I had man boobs. My face was out here somewhere. I was, and this was after I'd successfully lost weight. I thought I'd discovered everything, but then it all came back again. Fast forward to last year, February last year, I'd discovered stuff during lockdown, circadian rhythms, and managed to lose weight without consciously thinking about food, not consciously changing stuff, but walking my 10,000 steps, getting up early in the day and making sure I ate within a time restricted window. And I was still eating pretty much normal stuff. And that was based on a lot of stuff I'd read in the circadian code, Sachin Panda, and also that I'd got off the Hack Your Gut site. That was very interesting. But I couldn't get below 12 stone for that, which was probably still a stone too heavy for me. And as soon as I did anything wrong, ate at the wrong time, ate too many carbs or whatever, I ballooned in weight again, which is what happened last year when Mum and Dad moved up. It was then that I tried on the advice of Keegan Smith, the protein sparing modified fast. I did a lot of research into that, and it wasn't a video. It was aimed at weight loss, but it was about gaining athletic power. What is the way to become more powerful? One's to do strength and power training, but there's a time period that takes for the adaptations. And Keegan was suggesting that a far quicker way is to reduce your body weight so that you improve your power to weight ratio. And there's someone who played squash and was constantly changing direction, lunging, running fast, stopping, trying to go back to where I come from on the squash court. Just even half a stone makes a big difference on a squash court. So he was suggesting that within a month you could lose a significant amount of weight doing this protein sparing modified fast.
Can you just explain what that is briefly?
Yes. Sorry. So protein sparing modified fast. We know that we can fast, and we can fast for big periods of time. 40-day fasts are, have been documented, and they're in, the major religions, and we've seen it. And we've seen even there's a Scottish guy who fasted within a hospital setting for 386 days, but he had about 20 stone to lose. But the problem with fasting I think over the first few days is you start breaking down muscle in the shorter term to fuel. And long term, that's not a good thing for us, because muscle is part of our metabolic machinery. It burns energy. It's basically a storage tank for sugar. So if you've got more muscle, you can take in more sugar from the bloodstream. But also it's how we function, and it's what gives us strength. And strength is one of the major predictors of longevity. So fasting without trying to maintain your protein and your muscle that you have on your body and all the other lean tissue is a short-term strategy which leads to long-term issues. So protein sparing modified fast, the idea behind that was that you would take on roughly 800 calories or 200 grams of protein a day to give the body what it needed from a protein basis through the diet. It would be lean, no carbs, and so the body would concentrate on using its fat stores for the extra energy it needed, which is, from an evolutionary perspective, that's what body fat, one of its primary functions is to provide energy. So I Googled rapid weight loss, so just like, is this safe? Blah, 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 because as a personal trainer, I've been taught, we should go for 1 to 2 pounds a day, all of this sort of stuff. But then the evolutionary idea was that there was feast and famine, and that we were well adapted to fasting and actually can perform better in a fasted state, which I have experienced previously. And actually, recent research was suggesting that people who went through rapid weight loss were more likely to stick to their longer term weight loss plans and goals because of the motivational reward they were getting from seeing results, and that yes, they were able to better maintain their body weight and health in the longer term. So which was contradictory to what I'd been taught as a personal trainer and on my sports rehab degree early doors. So I thought, go for it. And yeah, the weight came off really quickly. It wasn't a pleasant experience, the 3-4 weeks, but I kept it going because of the weight loss. And I was still able to function primarily, but I don't like chicken breast and turkey breast and all of those things as a meat. I find it quite dry and bland and boring, but the weight loss made it worthwhile. And then that was when I came across carnivore, and we've talked about that in previous podcasts. Started carnivore as a 30-day experiment. After this, 15 months in, 16 months in now, I'm still doing it, probably at 95% rigor. So I still have occasional carbs, sweets, yogurt and honey and stuff like that, but I would say 90 to 95% rigor with carnivore. I went from 12 stone to 11 stone, and it was like when I was on the Budwig protocol. I didn't try to lose weight. It just came off naturally. For a month in September, I did specifically try to go lean again with less fat to get an extra body fat cut. That was with Uncom, Keegan Smith's lean countdown diet protocol. But since then, I've been doing everything just primarily my meat based, the occasional other stuff, and I've regulated between 10 and 11 stone 2 on a regular basis. So both those experiences, both on the plant food side and the meat based side, suggested to me that I didn't need to try, and read a lot around it. What's the understanding? We talked about calories. The issue with the calorie idea is that this idea that we can consciously decide what and how much we're going to eat and when we're going to be hungry and when we're not going to be hungry. But like pretty much every other function in our body, it's controlled below conscious level. Like even just watching your face there, you're blinking, but you're not deliberately blinking. Oh, I'm going to blink now. Blink. It's just happening. Your body temperature is being regulated now. You're not thinking, oh, I want a blood pressure of 120/80, but your body will be doing that. Your body temperature is being regulated, and we have these things called set points, a bit like a thermostatic control in body temperature. You put your thermostat at 37.8 degrees or whatever it is, 38.6 degrees for the ideal body temp. And if you get too hot, you start sweating to cool down. If you get too cold, you shiver. Well, it turns out that we probably have a body fat set point as well. And that's influenced by the foods we eat, but also other things such as our behaviors when we eat, things like sunshine, physical activity and stuff like that. They do play a role in all of this. And this is what we've discovered. And it means that we can actually reach our ideal weight without trying. The trying comes in changing what we're eating and the other behaviors, but we don't have to count calories and we don't have to go through hunger. Yeah, that's and I've got a couple of science reviews on this that I think you're going to get us to talk through.
Sure. Yeah, I'd just like to expand on this idea of conscious control of appetite somewhat. So I think that's really at the core of what we're talking about. So in my experience as a trainer in the past, in the early days, I used to give people calorie calculated meal plans to follow. And these meal plans did work for fat loss, but they only seemed to work for a certain group of people. And typically, these were people who were highly motivated by one or two things at the time. So I was working in a boxing gym. Some of the guys there were competing had to be a certain weight at a certain time, so they had a lot of pressure to meet a certain goal. Then there were other people I was training as well who had maybe a wedding or something like that that they were training for and trying to lose weight for. So these people who had a really high degree of motivation were able to stick to the plan, at least for a limited amount of time. But the other people who didn't have such a sharp focus, they knew they needed to be a bit leaner or they wanted to be a bit leaner, found it hard to stick to it. So what the essence of these plans were is creating a calorie deficit, so consuming slightly less energy than your body needs. So we can work
Yeah,
this out approximately. It's not an exact science, but we can get near enough for it to be useful.
yeah,
But the difficulty is in actually day in, day out, eating a little bit less energy than your body is telling you it needs. So
hunger.
from my own yeah, from my own experience, I'm fortunate in that I've never really gained a significant amount of weight. I've definitely had a bit more fat around the middle at times than I want. I've trained hard for years and occasionally
Yeah,
thought, don't really look as lean as an athletic as I could do. Need to do some work here. So over the years, I've experimented with many different things. I tried calorie counting myself, couldn't really stick to it. Never had the time to enter all this information into a system. As I said earlier, it's time consuming, it's boring. I think if you're eating
yeah,
a very varied diet, then you'll have to. There's a lot of work in that, in entering all that information into whatever app you're using.
yeah,
Um, People who eat a more consistent diet, if you look at the typical sort of bodybuilder diet where they're eating sweet potatoes and rice and some vegetables and chicken and meat pretty much day in, day out, there's a little
yeah.
bit less work for them to do because the types of food are the same. So it's easier for them to gauge whether they need to go up and down. But all of this didn't seem like a very just healthy attitude towards food to have to be counting everything. Um,
Yes,
However, over the years before I arrived really at where I am now, which is essentially a mostly carnivore diet, high protein, very high fat. Went through lots of other different diet styles, and most of them early on were quite high carbohydrate. I was brought up
yeah,
eating a pretty high carbohydrate diet. Not a bad diet in terms of whole foods, nearly all whole foods, but those regular carbs kept me regularly hungry. So I was constantly every 3 or 4 hours needing to eat, angry, and this was
yeah,
the first 20 to 30 years of my life, really, um, experiencing these ups and downs of blood sugar. I'm so glad that I don't have that now. Um, I constantly had to carry food with me. I could eat a large meal, and typically, a third to two-thirds of that meal might be carbs. I could eat
yeah,
a large meal and still feel hungry. I could be physically full, but still thinking about food, thinking about what was next.
yeah,
Um, yeah, Mike, you mentioned you've looked at a couple of papers on this, and what we're going to dig into a bit is what actually is going on here when we just change the types of food that we eat, that is somehow telling the body that we've had enough. It doesn't seem to necessarily be a quantity issue. As I said, I was eating quite a lot of food at times when I was on a high carb diet and still
Yeah.
never really felt satisfied.
Yeah, no, totally. And whilst you were talking there, actually just made me think of something else regarding the calories in, calories out stuff. Herman Ponce's basically paradigm shifting work on metabolism that totally debunked the idea that we could just move more and eat less, because essentially, I'll just touch on that very briefly. Every mammal across the planet has a range of calories that it can burn up to a maximum on a regular basis, and that amounts to somewhere between 2.5 and 3.2 times its resting metabolism. A rest, and so resting metabolism is how many calories we would burn at rest to basically perform all the functions that our body needs to do, all the cellular reactions, the chemical reactions, the nerve impulse, all of that sort of stuff, all takes energy, the recovery, digestion, all of that. And so for argument's sake, a resting metabolism might be around 1,000 calories for a 70 kilo person. 2.5 times that, 2,500 calories. So in theory, for someone who's not really athletically trained, etc., their muscles and mitochondria haven't been set up to be able to burn loads of energy, so they've got a small car engine, they might be able to, on a regular basis, be able to consume 2,500 calories and burn 2,000 calories. If you exercise more and eat less, what your body will do is, because it's like having a set amount of money you can spend each day. But if I spend more money on exercise, I have to cut back the money I spend on my healthcare budget. So I turn my immune system down. Maybe my nails become more brittle, my hair becomes thinner. I don't moisturize my skin because I can't afford that anymore because I'm doing all of this exercise. So there is a fixed amount of energy that we can spend each day. There's a little bit of variation in that at the top end, and clearly we can see on a 1 or 2 days people can clearly do far more in terms of energy, but that has a cost in that we end up cutting back elsewhere. So that's a key thing, that you cannot just exercise more to burn the extra energy. It will just come off the budget somewhere else. The appetite regulation stuff. So shall I share my screen with you here?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm just going to mention one thing while you're doing that.
Yeah.
So this idea of move more, eat less. Broadly speaking, you could say that is effective to lose weight, but it's too simplistic to really be useful for most people. The idea is that you'll increase energy expenditure and decrease energy coming in, but that doesn't really take into account what you're eating, the quality of the food. So if you just use this idea as a thought experiment for a minute, if a friend said to you, come around on Sunday, I'm cooking a huge meal, we're going to have a barbecue or something like that, make sure you bring your appetite, it's going to be a feast. What would you do Sunday morning? You'd probably eat less. Maybe you'd go to the gym or go for a long walk to expend some energy. So when you arrive at your friend's house, you've got plenty of appetite. So in other words, what you've done is you've moved more and you've eaten less. And the end result is you have more appetite. Yet this
Yeah.
is the exact advice that we're giving people to lose weight. We're telling them to do something that's going to increase their appetite.
Yeah, totally. And then there's also this idea of the body fat set point, that we end up moving up or down. It's like, this is where does the body want to come to rest in terms of how much body fat it has, and that influences what we want to eat. We've seen that gut bacteria seem to influence what we eat. So conscious control can only work so long. And as you're saying, things like making ourselves hungry will just make us want to eat more at some stage. The thermostatic control of this, in our temperature, it's very quick. It happens within minutes and hours. But with our body fat, it seems to operate over months and years. And so that's why we seem to, I think 95% of weight loss diets are successful in the short term, but within a year to 2 years, people have gone back to where they were or worse within that year to 2 year period. And so this is why we think in the long term, it's great for the fitness industry and the health industry, because people tend to blame themselves. Oh, I couldn't stick to the diet or this, that, and the other. And it's like, it's my fault. And you go backwards and forwards with this. And, we have all of these challenges and stuff like that. But we're actually setting ourselves up to just yo-yo backwards and forwards for life doing that. So can you see this on my screen now?
Yep. Nutrient-based appetite regulation, it says.
Nutrient-based appetite regulation. So first off, blunted appetite regulation. I'm not sure if I can actually manage to highlight. I can highlight that there in dark. So we've got there blunted appetite regulation, hallmark of advanced obesogenic state that hinders weight loss, makes weight loss harder, basically. So we can see already that appetite regulation, our internal control of appetite, is central to us being able to maintain proper weight. And what this study goes on to say is essentially, if we come back through basics of energy, intake and signaling, we've got, first off, let's look at appetite and hunger. Appetite is controlled by the gut-brain axis. This is the bacteria, the gut, the vagus nerve, and the brain. But appetite and hunger are not the same. So we've got this idea. Appetite refers to the upper brain regions of eating. So if we if we come down there, whereas hunger is a process of a physiological drive. So if we come here, that is signaled by an array of physiological stimuli such as the growling, growling and emptiness of the stomach, a decrease in blood glucose, and an increase in the hormone ghrelin. And ghrelin is the hormone that we know makes us feel physically hungry. You mentioned about eating food before and being full but still wanting to eat. What it goes on here is that based on these definitions, appetite can be experienced at any point, whereas hunger is experienced only under fasted conditions. So we don't have food in our stomach, we don't have nutrition, we get hunger. But appetite, we can have that in those fasted conditions, but we can also have it when we've been fully fed. And there are many reasons for that: stress, comfort eating, low blood sugar based on, you've had a high carb meal and then insulin comes in, takes it out of the bloodstream, and then you feel hungry again. You mentioned hangry. Things like that is this constant roller coaster of high-low blood sugar. So this article goes on to talk primarily about appetite and not physiological hunger, because I think most people recognize that our problem is we keep eating even though we know we shouldn't, or we seem to eat more than we need to eat. So let's have a look at that. One of the issues we have with the body is that it doesn't recognize energy. We don't sense for energy. If it was, we would get full much quicker. And you know intuitively that that's right, because you can eat 2 packs of biscuits, a box of chocolates, and take in a couple of thousand calories in one go and not feel satisfied. And that's one of the key things I found with, like yourself, when I was eating younger, I would always just want to carry on eating, even though I'd had loads of energy. What it turns out is that we sense nutrients. And we're going to go through those now. And these nutrients basically stimulate the release of 3 hormones that act as an appetite suppressant. So the first one we get to here, protein. High consumption of protein or amino acids is a good method to reduce total energy intake by increasing satiety in comparison to that gained from carbohydrates and fats. It goes on to say, essentially, the gut-brain axis can effectively sense the intake of protein and inhibit appetite accordingly when we've had enough. And it does this by the release of the hormones, cholecystokinin, glucagon-like peptide, and peptide YY. Now, we don't need to know any of this stuff about the hormones. Just know that if you eat protein in plentiful amounts early on in the day and probably early on in a meal as well, we will reach satiety far quicker. Okay, if we go through to carbohydrate intake, so bear in mind that the public health recommendations, our food pyramid, suggest that we get 55 to 65% of our food from complex carbohydrates and grains. What do we see here? In contrast to protein intake, carbohydrates have a lower capability to stimulate the secretion of CCK, one of the hormones of appetite regulation. Furthermore, a carbohydrate-rich meal has a lower duration in its satiety-inducing effect compared to a protein-based meal. What does that mean? What we'll see is that actually the carbohydrate can induce feeling full, but it doesn't last for as long as a protein-based meal. So if we go through that a little bit more, therefore, from a satiety point of view, we don't need to see that. We get a longer satiety response when consuming protein rather than carbohydrates. Furthermore, the carbohydrate elicits a lower secretion of the other 2 hormones, and therefore a shorter, what they call an anorexigenic state, basically an appetite suppressed state. So carbohydrate rich meal will make you hungry sooner or induce appetite again sooner. So in terms of actually on a day-to-day basis controlling what you eat, it seems that protein compared to carbohydrate would be a better macronutrient to base your food around, because you will naturally eat less calories through the day. If we go and have a look at the fat stuff, where we got that protein, carbohydrate intake, fat intake. As with protein and carbohydrate intake, consuming fat elicits those same 3 hormones. We see, again, no differences here. Fat intake is associated with reduced satiety effect by secretion of one of the hormones, CCK and GLP, but in contrast, one of the others responds well and increases the appetite effect. So fat almost seems to be neutral in terms of short-term satiety, but I have read elsewhere that fat is really important for longer-term satiety effects. What's also comes out in these is the types of protein, the types of carbohydrates that we eat. I'm just going to try and see if I can see where that is. Maybe not. Here we go. So protein. If we go back to protein here, we can see that there are 3 amino acids. Here, if I highlight this bit and this bit here, the satiation effects of protein can be further increased by consuming proteins that contain specific amino acids, like arginine, lysine, and glutamic acid. And I'm pretty sure that as science progresses, we'll find more of these. There's also another one that comes further on is leucine. Here we go. Leucine is also thought to be a major precursor of this anorexigenic response, or this appetite suppressant. So those 4 amino acids are primarily found in the highest quantities in meat. So from a weight loss perspective, it makes sense to base your diet around meat and fish and shellfish and stuff like that. If we look at the carbohydrate side of things, we see that there are ways to look at this from a carbohydrate sense point of view. So here, carbohydrate is a broad term. A carbohydrate-rich meal implies that from a given meal, the majority of macronutrient content is allocated carbohydrates, lesser protein and fats. Yields a high concentration of glucose building block upon digestion. As such, a food that has a high glycemic index basically has a low appetite suppressant action. And so what is a high glycemic index? This is carbohydrate that turns to sugar very, very quickly in the bloodstream. And this is such as refined carbohydrates, sugar on its own. So white bread, pasta, rice, all of these types of things, cooked potatoes, those types of things turn into sugar very quickly in the bloodstream. We go on to see here, however, similar to the way that amino acids determine the quality of proteins, the quality of carbohydrates is attributed to their digestibility. So not their energy, but their digestibility. Digestible carbohydrates are metabolized into glucose, while non-digestible carbohydrates have minimal to no contribution to blood glucose and help to increase the bulk of the food in the colon and to slow digestion. I think this is where we get the idea that vegetables, etc., are healthy for us, because in the context of a modern Western diet, we have a lot of refined carbohydrates. So by replacing those with vegetables with lots of fiber in, we slow down digestion, and this is definitely an improvement on eating the refined carbohydrates. But interestingly, what happens to that non-digestible carbohydrate is in the colon, non-digestible carbohydrates undergo fermentation, and you might intuitively know that from all the bloating and the gas, the farting, all of that type of stuff. That's the byproduct of that process. And what does it release? It causes the release of short chain fatty acids, which are in fact saturated fats. And that's where we get our energy from when we eat those digestible fiber. But we can get those same short chain fatty acids from a meat and fat-based diet. So we can see that there's 2 routes to that: a vegetarian route, a plant-based route, and a meat-based route. These short-chain fatty acids also elicit the secretion of these appetite-regulating hormones. So again, if you're eating a plant-based diet, and this is what I found on the Budwig protocol, well, I had high protein and high glutamic acid through my cottage cheese, but I also had all of this fiber. So I was getting great appetite control across the board from the nutrients I was eating. So that's a food. I think that pretty much summarizes the food-based idea of nutrient-based sensing, which then allows our body to determine what we need to eat. It's looking for nutrients, not energy. And that's the biggest flaw for me for the energy-based model of weight loss. calories in, calories out, because you're measuring something which the body does not measure. And so it seems to be a method that's doomed to failure. So I'll just unshare my screen there.
Sure. I'll share something which really just backs that up. So to summarize, when we're looking at macronutrients, clearly protein has the greatest effect on satiety. So
Yes.
I'll just share something now. Okay, so this is from Marty Kendall's website, Optimising Nutrition. So we've got a nice diagram here. This article is about the protein leverage hypothesis, which in simple terms is illustrated quite nicely in this diagram here. The idea is that if we increase our protein intake relative to carbs and fat, we're going to have better control over our appetite and better satiety. So carbs and fat are our sources of energy. Protein is more of a structural macro, although it can be used for energy as well. So if we can just tilt those scales a little bit, we don't have to go to any crazy extremes here. It might be just a small increase in protein relative to carbs and fat. We can have better control over our diet, over our energy intake. So I'll scroll down a little bit. There's a couple of other points here which are interesting. So here it says, how does the protein leverage hypothesis work? Protein leverage has been observed in a wide range of living organisms, from slime to apes and humans. This phenomenon demonstrates that protein intake influences appetite regulation and energy balance, leading to significant changes in body composition and metabolic health. Free living animals in the wild use their keen sense of smell and taste to seek out the nutrients they need. So it's exactly what we've been saying. No animal in the wild is counting calories. They're seeking out what they need. It then goes on to say, if they only have access to low protein foods, they experience excessive hunger, otherwise known as hyperphagia, in the pursuit of adequate protein. So it's really reinforcing what we've said already, that appetite will continue until an animal has had sufficient protein. I think there's one other graph down here that's interesting as well. So on the bottom axis here, we've got the percentage of protein in the diet. So it's not the total amount, it's the percentage of protein. And then on this axis, we've got satiety, so feeling satisfied, or at the top, feeling more hungry. It says, our satiety analysis of more than 1 million days of data shows that people who consume a diet with a higher protein percentage tend to consume much less energy than those with a bliss point protein intake of 12.5%. I'll come back to that bliss point in a minute.
The bliss point.
Yeah, this underscores the critical role of protein leverage in appetite regulation and weight management. So here, between these lines here, we've got the satiety zone. And for protein, that is somewhere between 15 and 35 to 40% of calories from protein.
Yeah.
And as you can see, hunger is decreasing downwards here as the amount of, as the percentage of calories from protein increases. So pretty clear here. This is the satiety zone. It's bracketed by these two lines here, just to give a kind of optimal overall nutrient intake. Below here is probably not going to be optimal. Above here, you're probably not going to be optimal. So this is the range that coincides with optimum overall nutrient intake and satiety. So you can see up to here about 35%, 40% maybe of calories from protein having the best effect for satiety. So in the paragraph above, it mentions the bliss point protein intake of the 12.5%. So you can see that's somewhere around here. So when protein intake is in this low area of about 12.5%, hunger is much, much higher. So food manufacturers have figured out this number. In the processed food industry, they know that if they're making packaged foods, when the protein level is around that 12.5%, the rest being carbohydrates or fat, that is the bliss point at which we just lose all ability to regulate appetite and keep going. So I think that's where that phrase, the bliss point intake, comes from. So I'll just switch my screen share off.
Well, those points. Go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate the same points you've made, really, regarding macronutrients, but from a different source. If we've covered the macronutrient side of things, I think there's another important point which we introduced earlier but didn't explain fully, which is the circadian timing. So we've talked about what to eat and the importance of emphasizing protein, that fiber may be beneficial if you're eating carbohydrates. So the type of carbohydrates is a factor, avoiding the higher glycemic carbohydrates. So in very broad strokes, those are two steps which people can take straight away. Should we have a discussion on meal timing?
Yeah, just want to tackle just a couple of points that you talked about there. Just want to revisit very, very quickly. On that graph that you showed, hunger was decreasing all the way, even if you went like to protein even higher. So we talked about that ideal satiety zone of up to about 35% of calories from protein. You can end up eating less, going more protein, but for different reasons, we don't want to go that far because in the long term, we do need that fat. We need the energy, and also fat plays an important role in hormone regulation and some structural stuff. So, cholesterol, the fats in the cells, all the cell membranes are made of fat, etc. So I think across the board, there seems to be pretty much every mammal on the planet has a percentage of about 30% of its calories. I know we keep talking about calories, 30% of its calories from protein and about 70% from fats. Now, obviously, we eat those carbohydrates, but we see that the ones that eat plant-based carbohydrates, because of the fiber digestion, actually the energy we get is from the fat, not from the carbohydrate. But in the modern world, we've created these carbohydrates which we get energy from, and that seems to have thrown the system out. And I just wanted to add to your food industry stuff, Pringles, they even brag about it. Once you pop, you just can't stop. And the tactic they use is they take amino acids and compounds from cooked meat, not the actual amino acids, but the compounds that indicate that those amino acids are in the food, and they put it onto a starch-based chip or a potato crisp. And that means the body senses that there should be those amino acids, and it can smell it, taste it, but they're not coming. So you have to keep eating the Pringles. And this is why they can stay. Once you pop, you just can't stop. They're bragging about it publicly that they can make you eat more than you need to. And it's because those amino acids aren't there, even though they've put something there to make the body think that they are. So, yeah, sorry, that just thought I'd stick that in.
I think the previous point you made as well about most mammals are eating percentages of roughly 30% of, let's say, energy rather than calories, 30% of energy from protein, 70% from fat, even if they're herbivores. So just to maybe clarify that, animals that are eating grass or plants all day are converting most of that, or a good deal of that energy that comes in as carbohydrate. They're converting it into protein and fats in their gut. That's why some of these animals, like ruminants, have much different digestive system, much longer digestive system than we do.
No, cool. So yeah, should we move on to the circadian
Yeah,
timing aspect then? Because we mentioned that, so we've talked about the nutrient-based stuff, but there are behavioral things that we can do that moderate our appetite regulation as well. Um, so do you want me to go ahead with this, Imran?
sure. Yeah, you mentioned in your own experience that just changing meal timing, you were able to improve body composition. And I think a lot of that information came from Sachin Panda's book, didn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So it was fascinating, this idea that we can control our body weight without consciously changing what we're eating. Um, and then anyone who is interested in stuff, I really encourage them to read the circadian code. Um, there's been a lot about, we've talked about the fact that we want to use an evolutionary perspective to try and inform what we're doing, although that is open to interpretational issues. But what we know is that from all different parts of the planet and over different millennia, over our development, we've come across all sorts of different food. But the one thing that all mammals and humans have had in common is that this is 24-day cycle with sun up and sun down. Now this changes again, the relative length of that, from the equator up to the North Pole and the South Pole. But essentially, we have this 24-hour cycle, and this is what circadian means, of a cycle of approximately a day. And if you think about it, it's a little bit, if you think of it as a shop that is open, we used to have supermarkets that were open just for 8 hours a day. So they might open from 9 till 5. What would happen in those days? They would be ready to be open. The doors would open and the shop was fully stocked, fully cleaned. The staff are fully rested. They've had a night's rest. They come in and they're ready to serve the customers. The customers go in, do their shopping. The cashiers take the money. Shoppers go. More shoppers come in. The cashiers get a little bit more tired. The shelves get a little bit more empty. The store gets a little bit more dirty. Come to 5 o'clock, all the cashing up gets done. A certain process only gets done at 5 o'clock once we've finished, because all the customers have gone. We can't take any more money in. Then what do? We think about cleaning the shop and restocking the shelves. So the cleaning and the restocking would always happen after the shop had closed. And this all happens overnight in a set schedule that the business would schedule, and then come back 24 hours later. It's opening up time. The shop's fully ready to go again. The cashiers are rested. The cleaning staff have gone. The shelf stocking staff have gone, and they've gone home to rest during the daytime, and the daytime staff come in. So we have this 24-hour cycle, and certain things happen within each part of that cycle, and it works like clockwork. But fast forward to the time we now have 24-hour open shops and supermarkets, customers coming in all day long and all night long. And sometimes customers are coming in and there's big pallets full of cans of Coke and other stuff, blocking the aisles. You can't get through the shop as well. It's not as nice, an experience. Many of the shelves are still empty, or, throughout the whole time, not just the nighttime, in the daytime as well. Shelves aren't fully stocked properly because we've got this continuous process of customers coming in, buying stuff, emptying the shelves. It can't be restocked because too many customers got to wait, but we've got to do stuff. Something gets spilled, can't get cleaned properly. And so we have this suboptimal state all of the time in the shop. This is essentially what's going on with the human body now. Is there was a time when we would go to bed at sundown and we'd finished eating, we'd go to sleep, the food would digest, and then our body would recover. But now what's happening is we're up later. We have electricity, which has been a great invention, but the light keeps us awake for longer. We do things like physical activity and eating food late at night, which disrupts that rhythm, means we can't do the regeneration work, the cleaning work, all of that stuff that needs to be done. So over time, we start getting little grumbles irritable bowels. So one of the big things that came across, this idea that overnight when we finish digesting, is that there is basically an intestinal, or a digestive tract, all the way from our mouth all the way down to our rectum, a process that goes through and cleans and restores and regenerates all the surface, the inside surface of the intestines, the stomach, the esophagus, all of that. And it's a 90-minute process, but it can only happen once we've stopped digesting. Something called the migrating motor complex. And in an ideal world, we would have 4 or 5 of those in a day, maybe even more. But if we eat, say we go to bed at 10 at night, but we ate at 9, the digestion is going to be maybe 4 to 6 hours of a heavy meal. And then we eat breakfast again at 8 o'clock. We're only going to have time for 2 or 3 of these cycles. So over time, our intestinal lining, our stomach lining, our throat lining, all of that breaks down. We lose 30% of those cells every day. They have to be replaced every day. Well, if we don't replace 30% of those cells, we only replace, say, 25% or 20% over a period of time, that breaks down, and the protection to the intestinal lining, the stomach lining, we get things like ulcers, stuff like that. So those are issues. We don't kill off the dead cells properly and recycle them. So this is one thing, is like the length of time we eat over the digestion. Sachin Panda found that typically most people were eating over a 15-hour window. And if you eat over a 15-hour window and you're digesting for another 4 hours, that's 19 hours, that leaves 5 hours for all the repair work to get done. So his suggestion was 12 hours at a basic maximum eating window. He highlighted a lot of studies that showed improved digestive tract through this smaller eating window, but also a change in effective energy expenditure. One particular study that struck me was one where everyone was eating the same macronutrients, the same number of calories, but it was split differently across 3 meals: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. One was where 25% of the calories were eaten at breakfast, 25% at lunch, 50% at dinner. The second arm of the study totally reversed that: 50% at breakfast, 25% at lunch, 25% at dinner. At the end of however many weeks it was, can't remember, it was 8 or 12 weeks, the people who were on the breakfast loaded calories, energy or macronutrient intake, they had essentially lost 10 pounds in weight compared to the group that ate the same amount of calories but backloaded towards the end of the day, which amounted to a notional 500 calorie a day difference if we look at it from that energy model. Exactly the same foods, but just eaten at different times of day. So that was, for me, that was a mindfuck. I can eat the same calories, but I can lose weight just by timing it differently. And that's what I did during lockdown. And I had no problem maintaining my weight. I got down to 12 stone and maintained that. And it was relatively straightforward. And I still ate pizza and things like that. It worked for me during lockdown because certainly the first part of lockdown wasn't stressful for me. So I would say that stress is a confounder for this, where it makes it difficult if you're eating the wrong types of food. So that was my experience with that. It was again relatively straightforward, but I didn't have to go to work. I was at home during the day. I could get out for my early morning walk, and I could regulate when I ate my last meal fairly easily. It was very straightforward to do that. So for people in that situation, that would be great to do.
Yeah, I think there's some really simple things that people can have here as takeaways. We're coming up towards probably the amount of time that we can spend on this podcast. I know we've both got things we need to
Mm.
get off to, but there's one more thing that I'd like to just cover briefly, which is exercise, because we haven't talked about that a great deal so far. So that's the other side of this energy in, energy out equation, if we're using that model. And here's an area where I think many people are going wrong, thinking that they can outwork a poor diet, or they can make a bad choice, or let's just say make a choice where they eat something that contains a lot of energy. It's not the best meal choice from a health point of view, and then they think, well, I'll just work that off with a bit of extra activity in the gym or something along those lines. Well, as we were saying earlier, certain types of exercise actually can increase appetite. And I think the information on this is not totally clear, but it leans towards higher intensities of exercise. So something like high intensity cardio, or perhaps some strength training, weightlifting, that type of training is more likely to stimulate appetite.
Mhm.
Whereas the lower intensities of exercise, things like walking, the just general normal daily activity that we do, or that we probably did a lot more of in the past when we lived more physical lives, actually tend to have more of an appetite suppressing effect. And in my own experience, I think that's true at least while you're doing the activities. Um, if you've ever been out on long hikes, so been out on a day's hike or half a day's hike, you probably find, I've certainly found, that during hiking, you don't really feel hungry. So if you're generally active at a low intensity for much of the day, which people probably were thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, when we did physical jobs, or we had to walk to gather and hunt food, during that time, appetite is actually down regulated a little bit. And then when you stop, when you sit down and you're stationary, that's when the hunger signals seem to come back on. And that would make sense from an evolutionary point of view, that we could do our activity. Then when we stop, we rest, that's the time to eat. But because modern life is somewhat upside down, in that most of our activity is in a chair, working at desks, and then we do physical activity for a break. We go for a walk for a break, or we go to the gym for a break. I think these appetite regulating signals can really get thrown off. And typically, the modern type of exercise that we do is we're trying to cram as much into as short a time as possible. So we're doing something quite high intensity. So the effect is we're stationary most of the time, and then we do a short burst of exercise, which increases our appetite. And during those times when we're stationary, we're often probably thinking about food quite a bit while we're working. Um,
Yeah,
so
I agree with all of that, and the I think what some of the stuff you experience if you're doing intense activity, you probably have there's a short term appetite suppressing effect to that, because essentially your body's in fight or flight mode and it's having to work like crazy. You don't want to be thinking about food, but you'll have caused more damage, depleted more energy from your body if you successfully survive that, and you're going to need food to rebuild and refill the fuel tanks. Um, I think as well from the gut brain axis point of view, they've I think they've shown that we talk about micro diversity, gut micro diversity, and this seems to play a role in our weight management. But 25% of that variability can be attributed to your level of aerobic fitness. So the more aerobically fit you are, the better your gut diversity. So that's an interesting point that can be explored maybe further in a further podcast, and then linked to this natural movement. The more intense your exercise is in a short burst, the more likely you are to sit down later on to recover. And there's another interesting part of that is like our fat burning doesn't happen when we sat down, because hormone sensitive lipase required for fat burning. I'll have to double check that this is still correct, but I've read that basically you need to be standing to have this enzyme stimulated, and if you're sitting, it isn't, and so it's very difficult to be fat burning in that process. So intense exercise tends to make you want to sit down more as well, and we do less of what they call. Do you remember the NEAT acronym, non-exercise activity thermogenesis?
Mm-hmm.
This idea of just people going about their daily physical activity, which we look at the blue zones, walking, gardening, shopping, all of this stuff, but we delegate all of that to technology now. And so our entertainment time is spent sitting, watching gaming, cinema, television, reading. So yeah, double whammy on that. And that's maybe something we're going to explore in another podcast, the intricacies of that side of things.
Sure. Let's just recap quickly, because I think there's some very simple takeaways that people can grab from this episode. So,
Yep.
Number one, we had increase the percentage of protein that you're eating and decrease energy that you're consuming from fat or carbohydrate. If you are consuming carbohydrate, fibrous carbs have a better satiety effect. Lower glycemic index carbs have a better satiety effect. In our experience, ketogenic diets, where we're eating roughly 30% of energy from protein and about 70% from fats, has worked really well for us for controlling appetite.
Yeah.
Then we mentioned the circadian side of things, which was pretty simple, really, consuming most of your calories in the early part of the day, and also having at least 12 hours out of 24 where you don't consume any food. Was there anything
Yeah.
else on the circadian?
Yeah. So just to add to that, because that's a lot of people are going to say, well, I can't do that. Just shift the window later. It's still going to be better than having this prolonged window for many reasons, both from an energy and a body recovery point of view. Is if you can keep that window to between 8 and 12 hours, that's gonna be great. The other thing with the circadian view is the importance of daylight, and actually sunlight acts as an appetite suppressant as well, which was is mentioned in quite a bit of the research now. And that was one thing when I was in on the Budwig protocol. I had a sunlight prescription. Get out and get as much sun as you can in the day, and that was without wearing sunglasses. So just as another thought, daylight is a big thing.
Yeah, another really good tip there. And then from the exercise point of view, plenty of low intensity activity seems to be the way forward. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do your high intensity, but the lower intensity activity seems to be better for appetite control.
Yeah, I think high intensity is important, but not to failure. I know we'll talk about muscle growth, and to failure seems to be an important aspect of that, but there's this other side of how far into stress do you go and how much recovery do you need that you're not going to get, and the overall, is this another stress factor that we're adding in, and what long-term impact that has on our need to eat. So yeah, I think high intensity is definitely very good, but we only need actually short bursts of it, and that can help massively with blood sugar control, etc. But not going to a state where you get this long-term uptick in appetite and needing to eat and eat and eat.
Okay, great. I think that's plenty there for people to have a think about, and some actions that they can move forward with if they want to. Anything else to add before we finish?
Yes, that I said at the beginning, we were working on stuff behind the scenes. So just to let everybody know that Imran and I are working together on an online coaching program. We've started taking on board one-to-one online coaching clients, just a small handful, but we're also looking to build longer-term group coaching, which would be primarily digitally based with weekly support and accountability. So if you like what we're talking about, you're willing to explore new perspectives, you think the stuff that we're saying is valuable to you, get in contact with us on Facebook, maybe comment or whatever, or direct message us, and we'll see what we can do together, whether it be worth us working together. But we're very excited about that opportunity, and we're doing lots of work in the background to get that up and running.
Okay, let's
Excellent.
finish there. Thanks very much,
Yeah.
Mike.
All right. Take care. Bye.